What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and I wanted to record a quick video today and discuss best of 1 versus best of 3. Now, when you're playing MTG Arena, every time you go to click play, there is a little option that says, would you like to play best of 1 or would you like to play best of 3? And I wanted to discuss them both because at the end of the day, the question of just what should I play, 1 or 3, at the end of the day, it's a personal decision because they're both drastically different experiences, which is why you will hear some people say, oh, this deck is a best of 3 deck versus this deck is a best of 1 deck. It doesn't necessarily mean, is there a sideboard or is there not a sideboard? There is more to it than that. So let's take a look at each of them and kind of discuss the merits. Now, for best of 1, let's assume that I want to just jump onto the ladder, jam some quick games. That's what best of 1 is for. This is, you get a 60 card deck if you're in Standard Alchemy, Historic, or Explorer. If you're in Brawl, just keep doing your thing. It's all best of 1, but rock on, have fun. If you're in one of these formats, best of 1, you step into the arena, you have a 60 card deck, and every match you play is only a single game. You go up against one person, they get 60 cards, you get 60 cards, you play the game, the winner of that game ranks up, the loser of that game ranks down, or stays neutral if you're in the 4th tier of whatever rank you're on, and that's that. It's very straightforward. For newer players, best of 1 is actually a really good place to start just to get the feel for the game. The one downside, in best of 1, you need to be aware of the meta you're going to experience. The best of 1 meta and the best of 3 meta, and by that I mean the popular decks people are playing the most, will be very different. In best of 1, you are far more likely to experience decks that are easy to disrupt with sideboarding, or decks that are just designed to win games quickly. Best of 1 lends itself to trying to rank up the ladder very, very quickly, because you can play a red aggro deck or the soldiers deck that we see a lot right now, or throughout Magic's history, like mono white weenie has been a style that lends itself to just quick games. If you're just trying to jam as many games as you possibly can in an hour, half an hour, whatever the case may be, to just get as many pips on your rank as possible and just climb the ladder, best of 1's not a bad place to go. And as a result, because that is a type of player that is attracted to the best of 1 queue, even if you are not that kind of player, but you are playing in the best of 1 queue, you will go against that style of deck a disproportionate amount of the time. You will see those decks far more often than you will see control decks or even mid-range decks. Like right now, as I'm recording this, mid-range is a very popular deck in the meta, very popular style in the meta. It's kind of the thing right now on the competitive scene. However, when I play best of 1, I primarily see aggro decks. They're not bad right now, but they're not like the jam. Like, I don't think, the World Championship that recently came around a couple months ago was not won by an aggro deck. It just wasn't. To be honest, I don't even know if anyone registered an aggro deck, now that I think of it. In any event, but I see it all the time in best of 1. That's standard. That's normal. You see that all the time. Now, in best of 3, flip side. So in best of 3, you will oftentimes see more controlling decks, more mid-range decks. And on top of that, there is an element of complexity in best of 3 that you do not experience in best of 1. And that is sideboarding. I've mentioned the word a couple of times today. Sideboarding is an ability to literally change your deck in between games. So in best of 3, you have your first game against an opponent. Then after that game, both players have an opportunity to consult their sideboards, and in so doing, they can actually take cards out of their main deck and put cards in from their sideboard that are adjusted to match specifically against what the opponent brought to the table. When you first set into a game, as on the ladder especially, you genuinely have no idea what your opponent is bringing to the table, and so you are locked into a 60 card deck that is trying to be flexible to deal with whatever they bring. Now, depending on what they are playing, once you go to your sideboard, you have 15 cards that you can shuffle around and then go into games 2 and then potentially 3 if there needs to be a tiebreaker. Now, this leads to matches taking significantly longer. It is part of the deal. It just does. Worst case scenario, takes about twice as long. And actually, to be honest, it ends up being a bit longer than that a lot of the time because, like I said, you end up going against more controlling and more mid-rangey decks. Now, couple of key tactical differences. In best of 1, there is no timer. So be aware that there are you have your priority timers. There is a rope. You need to take actions like every minute or so. In best of 3, there is a match timer, meaning that each player gets 30 minutes of priority. So they are allowed to have the ball in their court for 30 minutes during a match. That's all 3 games. If they are slow rolling and they run out of time, or if they're taking too long to make their decisions and they run out of time, they forfeit the match and you win by default. Or the other person wins by default. And they get all the bonuses of ranking up and all that jazz. Now, it takes a long time. Like, that's a long game. Because a match in best of 3 can take upwards of an hour. You know, if each player gets 30 seconds, plus time, you know, server side to, like, calculate things, it takes, you know, sometimes if 2 controlling decks that are very slow go up against each other, those matches will take a long time. It's part of the deal. So what kind of experience are you looking for? If you're looking for a quick jam, smash 2 decks together, see what happens, best of 1 does the job. If you're looking for a more thoughtful, more strategic experience where you're making decisions in games, and frankly, you have more decision points. Because you're playing a bare minimum of 2 games, at any given time, you'll have at least twice as many decision points in best of 3 as you would over best of 1. You just do, because there's more game to be played. And yeah, I personally really enjoy that. The reason that I'm making this video, so my editorial on it, is that I prefer best of 3. But I have played more best of 1 historically. So, there's one other detail. Best of 1 has what's called the hand smoother. That is something that you will experience. So some people will complain about the shuffler being rigged and about their draws being bad. It happens. It's a card game. We're playing a ton of games. Part of it is confirmation bias, I believe. However, there is a legitimate difference between the card draws in best of 1 versus card draws in best of 3. In best of 3, it is truly random. It will shuffle your deck into a random stack of cards and hand you 7 cards. Those cards are just the first 7 cards it ripped off the top. In best of 1, the game will procedurally generate 3 hands. And then based on the number of lands in that hand, it will determine which of the 3 it thinks is the best and give you that hand. That's the hand smoothing algorithm. And as a result, in best of 1, it is less likely that you will get mana screwed. One thing that I have seen in best of 3, I will get starting hands with 0 lands in them. It happens. In best of 1, that almost never happens. I will always, frankly, even 1 land hands are very rare. I have heard of people making best of 1 decks that are low to the ground aggro decks where every spell costs 1 or 2 with as few as like 13 lands in them. Because they know the shuffling algorithm will present them with 1 or 2 lands in their starting hand almost every time, just by virtue of how it works. And if your deck can run perfectly fine on 2 lands, and you can end the game quickly with 2 lands, in best of 1, running a low number of lands almost guarantees that you're going to get, 1 or 2 lands in your opening hand, and then you're going to draw nothing but action for the rest of the game. So people can abuse that and take advantage of that in a way that you just literally can't in best of 3 because it doesn't exist. So in best of 3, things are more random. The hand smoothing algorithm, it doesn't exist, and you have more decision points. So in my experience, I played a lot of best of 1 because I was building primarily janky decks. Now, building sideboards for janky decks is really freaking hard. It just is, because when you're building out a sideboard, you're trying to identify 15 cards that still work within your theme to some degree. They want to function within your deck. However, they also want to be case specific, where they can hose particular threats in good ways. So one example of that, cards like Pithing Needle. If your opponent has Planeswalkers, for example, or like Mishra's Foundry is like lands that can animate to become creatures, Pithing Needle is great against those. They just completely shut them down. They're just basically dead cards. And so great, like Pithing Needle is a cool card to put in your sideboard and pull in when you know your opponent has something that can be affected by it. And the main reason for that too is like Pithing Needle is a 1-drop, and it's not the kind of thing you want to be playing on turn 1 of game 1 when you have no information on what your opponent is playing, because you have to select a card. In game 2, even in the first turn, you have some information as to what your opponent's running, and so you don't mind drawing it out of your sideboard. But in general, you also want to find cards that synergize with your current deck. And so one example of that is I run a couple different types of reanimator decks. It's my favorite style. It's just what I do. And right now in standard, as of this recording, Titan of Industry is like the creme de la creme top reanimate target. It just is. It provides the most just generically good value. It produces a big body on board, potentially 2, and you just get whatever you need in the moment. You can gain a bunch of life. You can remove stuff. You can even get shield counters to help protect your team. It's all good. It's just generically good stuff. Now, in those same reanimate decks, I often will run 2 or even 3 Toxrill the Corrosives in my sideboard. If I'm going up against a go wide aggro deck, like the Soldiers deck, or like Esper Raffine decks that are really trying to flood the board, instead of reanimating the Titan, I will reanimate Toxrill, because Toxrill punishes the opponent for going wide, but otherwise it's not as good as Titan by a long shot. So it's a situation where, okay, if my opponent is going wide, I can slot in this reanimate target. And if I'm successful in getting it online in games 2 and 3, it's probably going to shut that person down hard, because it specifically hates their strategy. Unlike Titan, which is just generically good stuff. So finding those key pieces that can hate on your opponent's strategy, it's like an additional level in the deck building process, which is just really fun and really engaging if you want that type of challenge. So, what's the experience that you want to get out of Magic the Gathering Arena? Do you want a lot of quick games then that are relatively straightforward? And to be honest, RNG, luck, is a bigger factor in best of 1 because you have fewer decision points. Then best of 1 is for you. That's fine. If you're looking for something that's a little more deep, but is going to be slower for you, you can spend a half an hour to an hour in a single match, and if you lose that match, you get no progress. In fact, you lose progress towards your rank. That's a time investment that you can't really get back. So if you're just trying to ladder up, then best of 3 might not be where you want to be. But if you're looking for a deep, interesting Magic the Gathering experience, best of 3 is actually pretty great. I'm a fan. The other note that I want to throw out there before ending this recording is that top tier tournaments, actually pretty much every competitive tournament that I've seen, is best of 3. So if you're trying to rank up so that you can get into the qualifiers and hopefully someday make it onto the Pro Tour, if that's your goal, I highly recommend getting good at best of 3. Because if you can succeed and get pretty far in best of 1, but if you are not ready to sideboard once you get there, you're going to be in rough shape, because it's part of the deal. And it's part of the game at the higher levels and in the competitive circuits. If you want to take down a tournament, you need to know how best of 3 works. You just do. So be aware of that. But if you don't care about tournaments and you just want to get Mythic because you like it, and which for the record, there's nothing wrong with that. We're all gamers. Get those achievements. I get it. Then by all means, go for best of 1. There's nothing wrong with that. Anyway, so thank you so much for checking out the video. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, you can also catch me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhawks42. I'm streaming over there Monday through Friday in the mornings. I'm in Eastern Standard Time, starting at around 7:15 EST. So I'd love it if you wouldn't mind stopping out there and hanging out. I'd love to see you there. And in the meantime, stay good to each other, and I'll catch you on the next one.